University of Buea in Cameroon. He's also a senior guest researcher at the Center of African Studies, University of Copenhagen in Denmark. Dr. Tarzano holds a PhD in social anthropology from the University of Freiburg in Germany. He studied in Cameroon, Denmark, Sweden, and Germany. His academic career has taken him to universities in Switzerland, Germany, South Africa, and Denmark. Dr. Primus' research focuses on social practices and the production of meanings through media technologies, digital society and economics and governance, media and Pentecostalism, media and racism. He draws his research from a multidisciplinary background and training: social anthropology, media studies, critical diversity studies, international migration and ethnic relation, development studies, political science, and sociology. Dear participants, before I hand over the floor to Dr. Tarzano, please ensure that your mics and camera are switched off so that you'll be able to focus and grab the essential information from this event. And we equally have a session for question and answer. That's after the panelists would have done the presentation. So within that time, you can just drop your questions or contributions in the chat box, or you use the icon of the raise of your hand. Ladies and gentlemen, we equally have interpretation services, so feel free to either switch from English to French or French to English, depending on your language of choice. Dr. Tarzano, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And welcome everyone. Welcome to the webinar, which has already been introduced by Vanessa. We are hoping to have a vibrant 1 hour in which we'll be talking about the women's visibility. But before then, I would like to introduce our panelists. We have 3 panelists, and I'm going to start with Dr. Liliana Tanga, who is a senior researcher at the University of Free State in Bloemfontein in South Africa. She has published extensively on gender, discourse, and politics. And she's also involved in humanitarian work, peace building, social cohesion. She recently co-authored, co-edited a collection of essays and poems under the title, When the Sun Turns Red, Tears from a Land in Turmoil. And Dr. Atanga, you are welcome. I mean, Professor Atanga, you're welcome. Secondly, we have Dr. Justine Ayuk, who is a senior lecturer of gender studies at the University of Buea in Cameroon. She researches on feminism, critical feminism, gender and politics, power and representation. She's also involved in, she's also working as a consultant, gender and development consultant, working for United Nations Institute for Economic Development and Planning. She's also working for Africa Program of United Nations University for Peace, and also the Pan-African University of the African Union. Third, we have Ms. Stephanie Mushu, who is a human rights lawyer. She's a senior fellow at the Aspen Institute New Voices. She's passionate about sexual and reproductive health. So she's working on issues of abortion, safe access to abortion, and also uses her legal skills to support victims of abuse. She's interested in using policy to change women's rights. So now that we have introduced our panelists, I would like to ask them, we don't expect that everybody knows what women visibility is. So I will start with Dr. Ayuk to tell us a bit about what we understand as visibility, women's visibility.
Thank you very much, Dr. Primus. Welcome to this webinar. I am quite elated to be part of this discussion. Basically, when we talk about visibility, I want to first of all start off by observing that oftentimes when we talk about visibility in terms of economic, political, and social aspects of society, we tend to focus more on women. And why do we focus on women? Because when we look at our history, our historiography, we observe that the way we have developed and implemented policies, development policies over the years, tend to treat men, women, boys, and girls as a homogeneous group. And in so doing, we observe that there is a tendency to explain the experience of women based on knowledge produced from males' experience. And this has, affected or influenced the kind of policies that are put out there, which affect not just men, but women, boys, and girls as well. And so because of this reason and all these challenges, women's concerns tend to be not adequately considered when it comes to economic, political, sociocultural processes, and even planning and policy. So visibility in this essence, it's understood in terms of how we can bring that alternative perspective to economic policy planning, to economic development, political development as a whole, that is rooted in the context-specific experiences of women, which for a very long time have not been taken into consideration. So in this context, we are looking at visibility in terms of how we can equally bring to the fore the equal contributions, concerns, interests, of course, which are conflicting, of men and women in policy making, in development planning, in project planning, and also in terms of how we want to chart our development as globally and even as African in particular. So it is within this context that I want to understand visibility. It's not as if the women were missing. They have been contributing, but the way in which we integrate their contribution into the overall development process has been problematic, especially when we look at it from the feminist point of view. So our intention here is to chart ways in which we can make women's contribution known, and we should make it clearly visible in our development planning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ayuk. That is very, very informative. And Steph, do you have anything to say concerning this? Why do we have to talk about visibility?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Primus. I agree with Dr. Justine in terms of the visibility, but from my perspective, I look at gender beyond the traditional binary view of male and female and recognize other genders that exist, including intersex persons that were recognized in Kenya at the last census. But, just speaking about women visibility, for me, it's the mainstreaming of women's rights in all aspects, like Dr. Justine said, and not just recognizing that, there's women's rights, but protecting them and advancing them.
Okay, wonderful. Prophet Atanga?
Thank you very much. Very interesting perspectives from the other panelists. I'm going to come in traditionally to me from a very linguistic perspective. And I would like to reframe the topic, permit me, just for my understanding of visibility. It says women's visibility. It can sound to some other person as women seeing, the visibility to women. So for me to understand it better, I'll put it as the visibility of women, which means that women's appearances in spaces, and those spaces like those that Dr. Justine indicated, economic spaces, political spaces, financial spaces, and so on and so forth. And if we look at it as women's appearances in those spaces, not just appearances, but agentive, substantive appearances and presences in those spaces, then we can now critically look at women being visible. I will want to say that I am a visible woman, and that is why you could identify me and bring me to this space. There is an expression I learned recently where somebody says, I see you. You are here. Why is it important for me to say, I see you? It means that you are substantively, materially important enough for me to recognize you for the value you hold in the space in which you find yourself in. So when we talk of women's visibility, I begin to ask myself, why is it a problem? When women have always existed, they've always been present in spaces. It's not as if women are not present in the political space, but why is women's visibility a problem in the political space? It then takes me to a higher level, which is the participation, the agency, rather than the passivity of women in those spaces. What are women in political spaces? Are they just voters or are they being voted? What is women's visibility in financial spaces? Are they those who interact financially and are in critical financing decision-making positions, or they are simply those who are passive, benefiting, or not even having access to finance? So to me, those are the kinds of things we were looking at today. If it is a theme of a conference or a webinar like we have today, it therefore means that women's visibility or the visibility of women in these spaces is problematic. And therefore, we need to dissect what that problem is, that they are in those spaces, but they are not visible. We all remember the book we read in secondary school titled The Invisible Man. It's not as if the man was invisible, as in you look, you don't see. He was present, but people were not seeing him. They will push him and pass as if he is not visible. I think that's the perspective I want to look at this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thanks. That is very insightful. And I would like to push you more. Maybe I should start with you. Why do we have to talk about women visibility in the first place? Or the visibility of women in the first place?
It's a big thing. We will easily ascribe culture to the issues of women's visibility. We will easily bring out the concept of division of spaces. In my PhD dissertation, which is as old as 2007, I noted the discourse of women as domestic and men as public, which said that women's places are in the home or in the kitchen. We even remember a one-time Nigerian president who says a wife's place is in the kitchen and in the bedroom and other places, you know. Women are not as invisible as we think, in the sense that women are in these political spaces. They are in these financial spaces. But what position are they occupying in these spaces? What is their agency in these spaces? Are they in decision-making positions? Are they in policy influencing positions? Someone in the other panelists talked of women's participation in policy. There is, if I take, for example, a situation where women's bodies are a subject of debate, for example, abortion rights, for example, sexuality rights, in a parliamentary situation, how many women are in the parliament in the first place where this bill of abortion, for example, is being debated? I take the economic situation. We have the famous Anglophone conflict, which is raging on. Who are the biggest victims? They are women, but what do they have in financial terms when they are the primary people who interact with the family, who ensure feeding, hospital bills, education, and so on and so forth? How much access do they have to money and decision-making about money? How much access do they have to credit? How much access do they have to influencing policy? Women in the civil society may as well say, okay, in terms of policy, this is what is best for women, but that policy gets to be voted in the parliament. In that parliament, what is the representation of women? Even when women are in the parliament, what is their visibility in the parliament? My research, again, if I can draw back on recent research of women's participation in the parliament, a lot of them are just nominally represented in the parliament and not substantively, which means that they just sit and we count them as women in the parliament. But how much talking are they doing that influences or changes the policy in the parliament? And even if they do talk, and there are only 30% of women in the Cameroonian parliament, or 31% thereabouts, is that 30% critically important or enough to influence and change policy in favor of women? And of these 30% of women who are there, how many of them are feminists or think actively about policies that affect women? Those are the kinds of things that I think we should be looking at. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. I am amazed by how you interrupt the types of, how you interrupt spaces with this type of questions, especially women being in the parliament. Now, I would like to ask Dr. Ayuk, is it, when we talk about women visibility, are we trying to look at it within the context where it exists, or we have to compare this with what exists in other countries, other societies?
I think when it comes to issues of feminism, gender, and women's rights and concerns, there is need to be context specific, because there are certain aspects of the trajectory that are applicable to the Western context that we may find maybe unproblematic in other contexts. So, which is why even in contemporary time, we talk about feminisms, which means there are multiple perspectives in understanding what constitutes subordination, which of course I see the issue of visibility rooted in aspects of subordination. And so as Africa or Africans, we need to chart our own context-specific way forward towards solving this problem. And just to add to what Professor Atanga said, in fact, she actually, touched on very pertinent issues that speak to issues of political and economic visibility of women, particularly African women. But again, I think we also need to question how women get into this position. Because the recent debates surrounding the whole issue of political representation, women's rights, especially at parliamentary level, is whether women are actually voted into this legislative assembly as women representatives. Now, we need to make a distinction between a female politician and a woman representative. If we look at most of what is happening across Africa, regardless of the fact that you hardly come across an African country without a national gender policy that clearly outlines the national institutional framework for addressing some of the issues we are debating here today. But why is it that, we always still come back to this question? And the question is, are women voted as women representatives? I think the answer is no. They are elected as political representatives. So as they enter parliament, they take up the political agenda of their party. So the question we should be asking ourselves, do we have a system that allows for women to be represented, to be elected or nominated to represent women as a group? Secondly, Professor Atanga talked about whether we have feminists or femocrats. Unfortunately, what we see a lot in the political scene is more of femocracy than feminism. And I would define femocracy as a patriarchal autocracy, you know, a feminist autocracy that runs parallel with the patriarchal norms, the patriarchal power from which it derives its support, you know. And so we find ourselves in a situation in which, like Dr. Atanga rightly puts in, you see women who are politicians, but they are not representing women. Again, what about the system, the political and economic culture? Is it women friendly? Are we able to take up the feminist cap and discuss it the way it is supposed to be discussed? Or do we want to, you know, seek strategies that keep the status quo in place? Because if we are talking about promoting women's visibility, you know, to go beyond numeric terms, to actually look at that agency that has a transformative potential, that is able to engender the expected social transformation and equality and acceleration of women's rights, etc., then we need to go beyond discourses that are oriented towards basic welfare issues, you know, and focus on those aspects that touch on gender relations, that touch on patriarchal norms, and that questions even the system within which we operate, because it is highly masculine, patriarchal, you know, and, you know, androcentric. We have a system that privileges male dominance. So the question is, do we continue to emphasize, you know, strategies that add on women to a system that is highly, you know, embedded with structural inequalities that limit even the potential of women who are able to make the difference to be able to actually get their voices heard? So I think these are other perspectives that we should be looking at this debate. Thank you.
Wow, Dr. Ayub, thank you so much. I can see we are gearing towards politics. I would like to pull back and call on Steph to make a comment on human rights, because there's a burning debate in Africa concerning who is human. And I think this is very much connected to what we are saying here. So Steph, how do we connect women visibility to who is human from a human rights perspective? So Prof. Atanga, maybe you could say something concerning that?
When I saw that, I asked myself, why is the word human coming up? Who is not human? I couldn't wrap my head around it because I've not read literature around that word human. But going back to the concept of human rights, there is this famous quote by women that women's rights are human rights, which therefore puts the question, is a woman a human? Hey, as a woman, I'm going to laugh because I definitely am human. I definitely have rights. But why are my rights an issue? Excuse me? My rights are an issue because my rights are sub-rights. Sub-rights in the sense that men's rights are rights, but my rights are not rights. Men have rights over my body, but I don't have a right over my body. Why? Why is the number of children that I'm to have determined by somebody? Why is it somebody who needs to determine if I should have children or I should not have children? The issue of sexuality, why is it decided that I must have sexual intercourse with my husband if he so wants? It's my body. I can decide to have sex or not have sex. I'm sorry to be blatant here, but these are the things that kill women. A lot of gender-based violence happens because women want control of their bodies and do not have that control, and they get abused for seeking to have some control over their bodies, for seeking to determine if, for example, I want to have a sexual an intimate relationship with my husband or not. And when I refuse, I get beaten for refusing him his rights over my body. And I don't have a right over my body. Therefore, am I human or am I not human? That is why women tend to say women's rights are human rights, because in as much as you have that desire and you want, I do not have the desire and I don't want. It's my right not to want, just as it is your right to want. So we should be looking at a compromise rather than you insisting in it's your right and I do not have any right. I am not property. I am human. I am woman. Thank you.
Dr. Ayuk, anything to say in that direction? Connecting human rights to women's rights to human rights? Dr. Ayuk, are you there?
I'm not really though. Good afternoon.
No, I was muted. I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, all right.
And I think when Professor Tanga was speaking, I was just smiling. I say, these are the kind of people we need, you know, because what I see as a worry is that we don't want to take up this kind of discussions, you know, at the policy level. When we talk about reproductive issues, for instance, we focus more on reproductive health. But reproductive rights is more important than reproductive health, because some of the reproductive health issues that women, for instance, face stems from their lack of control and ownership of their reproductive rights. You know, again, these are issues that speak to power relations, that speak to the need to challenge status quo, and it comes with a lot of resistance. It comes with a lot of bureaucratic resistance of various forms, you know, like denial, like, you know, structural inequality, where people don't even want you to take up this kind of, to table this kind of issues, even at policy circles, you know, people are not willing. And so if we want to really talk about visibility, the visibility of the African woman, as far as her rights are concerned, we should be looking at discussions that go beyond addressing practical, what we call in gender studies, practical needs, those needs that just contribute towards improving women's conditions. We should be speaking to strategic needs that improve their status in society, that gives them the voice, the agency that they need to be visible. You know, and this is the kind of discussion that we should be looking at. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you so too very much. I am somehow very interested in knowing what benefits it would be when women are visible in Africa in the economic, political, and social sphere. What benefits would this accrue to our society? Tanga, maybe you could step in.
Yeah, I will. I will send back the question to you. What benefit do you have? Why will you question my benefit where you cannot question your own? I am human. I need to have all the rights that you have. I need to be capable to make decisions for myself. And this culture thing, when I say culture, I just don't mean traditions. These ways of thinking, ways of doing, ways of being have been so entrenched that they have become stereotypes that even we women will resist. I remember once in the university, I was having a conversation with female colleagues, and they told me, you know, we are women now, and we really cannot just behave like men. So even when we have these ambitions, we need to curb them down because we are women. Yeah. So I can curb down my ambition for the family, but you cannot curb down your ambition for the family. Is that it? So if I get visibility, it threatens your manhood. Does it? Yes, of course. A lot of women also suffer gender-based violence because they have more visibility than the male party in the family, and then they get abused. The kind of education that we give our children is problematic because schools recycle all these discriminations. Schools do exclusions in the sense that the conditioning of women, even in the classroom, even in the way teachers teach, in the way teachers assign students, are gender biased. I give a very recent example. Yesterday, I was teaching a group of high-level students in the Pan-African University of Water and Energy Sciences. And I told the students, imagine a leader and describe this leader based on the leadership theories that you have learned in class. A female student started and said, he. And I asked, so in your mind, a leader is a he? He said, oh, sorry, madam, it just comes. I said, it doesn't just come. You have been conditioned to think of he as a leader, even when you speaking are a leader. You were chosen to be here because you are a leader with a capacity to influence, to change policy, and make a difference in your community, in your society, in your country, in the continent, because you have been designated as a leader. If you see a leader as he, then you, the female, will not act as a leader. So I think that in our teaching, in our curriculum, in our school materials, the content should be reviewed such that these subtle gender biases, these micro discriminations are removed, such that the imagination of a leader should also be female, should be any kind of human, not just male. Because if you look at it from a human perspective rather than a masculine perspective, then women can be leaders. And again, when they say if women are leaders, the world is better because they are more considerate, they have a better grounding of their community because they come from the grassroots. And when I say the grassroots, I don't mean rural, I don't mean in any way poor. When I say grassroots, I mean they understand the foundation of the family, the foundation of the community, because they have the day-to-day understanding of educational practices of children, of health needs of children, of sexual needs of children. It's even women who tend to give sex education to their boys and their girls, because men tend to not have a lot of time to invest in children. It's women who invest in children. Therefore, women taking up this position, again, I want to come back to the word including. I'll be addressing myself to Dr. Ayuk. We do not talk of inclusion of women in these spaces because it gives agency to the person including. It therefore means that it's a man who will be including a woman. No, I don't want to see it that way. It's policy that should be inclusive. If that policy is inclusive, women will be included in these spaces. Another thing that we use to exclude women is experience, expertise, education. Why would I strive to be a bank manager when I've never seen a female bank manager? Why would I strive to be a president when I've never seen a female president? If policy is inclusive in such a way that these spaces must be dominated and inhabited by all humans, that is the two genders or the three genders, because the other gender is not very obvious, women then will inhabit these spaces, women then will be visible, women then will be role models to other women, and therefore there will be no more scarcity of women in those spaces. So when I talk of inclusive policy rather than men including women, if we go back to the parliament, I'm sorry, moderator, I'm taking us back to politics because politics is one that determines many of these things. If we go back to the parliament, she talked of feminists and femocrats. If we have a policy like that of other countries, which is parity in the parliament, right? The mere fact that women are there if a policy comes up that is against these women, they would definitely react to it. It's not enough to have feminists. You will have very few feminists because very few women are feminists. But if you have enough women within that space, if we work on gender parity rather than a quota, we will not have to do with fighting for women's spaces, because the policy will already say that women are included in those spaces. Women will benefit from this, gender disaggregated benefits and roles. We are not asking for equality as in, because a man can stand up and do his thing, I too can stand up and do my thing. That's not what we are asking for. We are asking for equality of chances, equality of opportunities.
Wow. And also, thank you very much. Thank you for cutting this very deep. You already mentioned something that I wanted to throw back to you, which is that of a female student thinking of someone in position of power as a man. So often we hear that when we see many women appearing in public or in politics, we often hear this type of, I mean, it may not be 100% the way I'm going to put it. They often say they are taking over, you know, it's like they're taking over power, they're taking over this economic sector and things like that. Can we make a comment on this, Dr. Ayub?
Thank you very much, moderator. Before I comment on this, I wish to say here that we should be very careful not to think that a woman or a female politician would necessarily act in favor of women. And so when we look at the whole issue of inclusiveness, we look at that kind of inclusion that can engender the expected transformation. And what is the expected transformation? We want to see more policies that are gender responsive being implemented. We have so many policies. Like I said earlier, more than 60% of African countries have a national gender policy. And the national gender policy clearly provides specific recommendations in terms of how we can mainstream gender and women's rights issues at all sectors in our various countries. We have that. Many, if not all African countries have ratified African Union conventions, United Nations conventions. So we have these policies. The problem is when it comes to implementation of these policies. Do we implement those policies in a way that actually can engender the expected transformation? Because what we have, in terms of numeric presence, women are visible. You know, if you look at national parliaments, if you look at even the women in the economic sector, if you look at the Global Gender Gap Report, the 2022 report is available online, which is put together by the World Economic Forum. You know, we are at 60% globally in terms of economic parity. You know, even though we are still at about 22% in terms of political representation, but it shows that in terms of numeric visibility, we see women. And in terms of education, we are even at 95% closure. So the question is, why is it that that numeric presence is yet to translate to substantiveness? That is where the issue is. And if you look at current debate and even research towards women's economic and political rights, is anchored more on how we can translate the numeric visibility to substantive visibility, because it is at that level that we expect to see the agency, the voice, the rights coming up, you know. And because I think that, you know, we have quite a good number of policies. The problem is, to what extent do we implement those policies the way they are supposed to be implemented? We have issues of structural inequality. Our institutional cultures are highly patriarchal. You know, like Professor Tanga rightly said, even the law is androcentric. until recently, even the Cameroon Electoral Code was, loaded with sexist pronouns. The president is he has this and all of that. So, but the good thing is that the transformation is gradual, but it is ongoing, which necessitates this kind of discussion to be able to see how we can build capacity, throw out some of this information so that in our little corners, we can do the right thing, and so there is need for gender training. And to be honest, UNDP and UN Women is doing a lot, in terms of building capacity of policymakers at the economic and political sphere, because we always focus on politics and economy because these are the two very significant domains that can actually produce that transformation that we want to see. So I think that we need to, continue with sensitization and also targeting more of policymakers. Like, for instance, the work I do with the UN Institute, the United Nations Institute for Economic Development Planning, is to build gender capacity of African policymakers, to see how we can mainstream gender in our policy planning, mainstream gender even in budgeting, to take up some of these issues that speak to substantive visibility of women in terms of economic, politics, and human rights related issues. So I think that when we do this, it is not going to benefit women only. In fact, there is a World Bank publication that came out as early as far back as 2000 that demonstrated how gender inequality in rights, in resource, and in voice affect economic growth. So it is not women, countries stand to benefit in terms of economic growth and in terms of development as a whole, when we, take up issues that speak not just to numeric visibility like we see, but also on substantive visibility that is manifested in terms of the proliferation of gender responsive policies and implementation of gender responsive policy and action that are geared towards promoting equity. Like Professor Kanga said, we are not really at this point, we're looking at fairness in terms of political voice, economic empowerment, and also human rights, women's rights issues. Thank you.
If I may, moderator.
Yes, we're running out of time, but I give you like 2 minutes maximum, so that we can move to the next.
Dr. Ayuk has said some very critical things, and I want to hammer on them. She used the phrase gender responsive policy. I think that is where the problem really is, because it doesn't matter if we have a gender policy. Is it responsive? Is it implemented? And even if we have feminists within the decision-making position, only the feminists cannot implement that policy. Yeah. We are looking at a situation where everyone is informed enough to understand the need for the inclusion of all groups that need to be included. Today we are talking about gender. Tomorrow we may talk about persons with disabilities. The next day we may talk about people of the elderly. There are all kinds of inclusions that need to be put into policy. So we should be looking at a situation where people are sensitive to policy and are responsive to policy and are implementing policy. Women's visibility is a problem simply because policy is not being implemented or even being reviewed. We need to review the language in the policy itself to be sure that that language is working for the visibility of women. It's not enough to have women in parliament. It's important to have substantive women in parliament. And that is why I had an issue with parliamentarians who represent the subgroup of women. If that is the case, we should also have parliamentarians who represent men. Otherwise, women will always be a subgroup. That was my issue. I am not in any way challenging feminism. I am insisting that women should not be looked at as a vulnerable minority group that has to be treated with tokenism. Women are humans. They are not just women, they are humans, and therefore should not be treated as if they have a scar, and therefore it needs to be healed. Reason why we have people like Dr. Ayu, why we have people like the other, I'm sorry, is it Claire, the other panelist? Yeah,
Stephanie,
we need to have these conversations going. If I did not ask the student yesterday, if leaders are only male, she wouldn't even have realized that in her subconscious, a leader is a male. That is why I insist we need to go back to curriculum. We need to go back to educational materials to start representing all human beings within educational material. Thank you.
And yes, thank you very much. And I would also like to add something in this direction, that in my teaching, when I'm talking about feminism, some of the students think that I've been some sort of bought over by women. And I tell them I just want to be human, because to know what women go through, to know about women issues, is trying to be human. It's not like I'm trying to do myself a favor. I just want to save myself. I just don't want to embarrass myself. Now, I would like us to, we have just about 10 minutes, and within these 10 minutes, we would like to talk about policy recommendations. We also like to answer questions that are coming from the floor. So Professor Tanga and Dr. Ayuk, are there any policy recommendations that you can suggest to us, to any organizations, to the state, to any stakeholders who are interested in seeing that women are visible in all spheres of life?
If I may take the floor, I think that in terms of recommendation, I want to go back to the position of the African Union, which is the regional framework that guides, the kind of visibility that we want women to have. And to go back to the gender and women's empowerment, gender equality and women's empowerment framework, which is a GWE framework. That is a strategy, a 10-year development strategy, 2018 to 2028, that aims at increasing the visibility of women in the economic, political, and social life of Africa. And many African countries, AU member states, have ratified this initiative. And I think that if we look at the 4 pillars, if African countries were to implement the 4 pillars of the GWE strategy, I think it's going to contribute significantly towards solving the problem we are looking at as far as the visibility of women is concerned, because it focuses on issues like the need to eliminate barriers, which Professor Tanga raised in her intervention, barriers to the implementation of gender responsive policies. And like Professor Tanga rightly said, women's visibility, it's not a women's specific agenda. Rather, it is a gender specific. It is something that we as society, men and women, need to come together and see how we can, address this concern, because like I say, it is going to benefit countries in Africa as a whole in terms of economic growth. There are statistics to justify this position. So if we focus on eliminating those barriers and also promote, women's rights issues, instead of the recent observation where we tend to focus more on aspect of reproductive health, because reproductive right, it's something that is really, really problematic. Like Professor Tanga said, issues of violence, which is, to a certain point, if you look at the human rights report in Africa, to a certain point, we may think that, we are experiencing femicide in Africa, due to the number of cases of domestic violence that we experience. So if we have policies that are effectively implemented to prevent, to strengthen women's rights and to protect this right and to create that conducive environment for women to be able to exercise their political, economic, and social rights, then that will go a long way to address the problem. And then there is also issues of voice. We need to create a system that can amplify women's voices. Because the observation, it has been documented that our institutional system are highly patriarchal and androcentric, male-centered, and poses challenges in terms of the extent to which we can actually articulate some of these issues that touch on aspects of women's rights and visibility in substantive terms. So I think that my recommendation will be that we should, see how we can implement this GWI initiative, because it's also going to promote not just women's empowerment, but we're going to have a society that is influenced by aspect of social justice, fairness, and together we'll be able to enjoy the benefits that come and contribute equally to the development of our societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. Thanks a lot. We have just about 6 minutes. So I think it is but fair that we go to questions. If you have any questions, earlier on I saw a question from Alice Buhinja, who was asking, why talk about women visibility now, not before? Why don't we talk about it later? And then she also asked about who is responsible for women being visible. She didn't ask this question directly to any particular person. So maybe we'll go with the first. Why do we talk about women visibility now? Why didn't we talk about this before? Why can't we postpone it? Prof, you're muted. Prof, you're muted.
Okay, it's Professor.
Prof,
yeah, if I may, I think in one of my interventions, I answered the question about who should make women visible, because I said women are present in these spaces, but invisible in the spaces. There is this expression that a lot of women's organizations are using, which is nothing for us without, I can't put it well, nothing for us without us. I don't know how they put it, but it simply means you cannot be taking decisions on me when I am not a part of that decision making. I think that it's not really for someone to make a woman visible, but it's easy for a woman to be visible because she's ignored because she is a woman. It's very easy to say that women should take up these positions and be visible, but we have different kinds of capital. Like the cultural capital, women do not have that cultural capital to speak up and speak out in public places. One, they have been raised to stay silent in public. And like someone said, Valerie said in the chat that religion has a core role to play in all of this. We have to break down some of these traditions and stereotypes that relegate our females to the silent position. The other thing I noted is that when systematically women inhabit some of these spaces, for example, the human rights spaces, the political spaces, the economic spaces, they begin to grow confidence and therefore express their visibility. That express is not the word I really like to use. Assert their visibility in these spaces. But imagine that we're having this high level debate today. I'm a university professor. We are all high level. We are all leaders of civil society or doctorates. And you bring another woman who is a grassroots woman with probably advanced level. And you expect her to compete here. If you've brought her here and she stutters today, you brought her here, she stutters tomorrow, the third day she will not stutter, even though she has advanced level. And I challenge CAFU Institute to that, to open spaces up for all kinds of people. There are grassroots women who are more experienced in these things than even I, who claims I've done a lot of research on it. Their experiences are real. Mine are based on research. So Women need to take up these spaces, but we also need to open up these spaces. We need to sit on those tables. We need to even crash into those spaces. And for the person who asks who should give that visibility, even in this forum today, a woman can crash this forum and claim her space and speak out and speak up. That is asserting yourself and being visible in those spaces. So I challenge us women to take up these spaces. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll have to have closing in a minute, but someone has asked, what does femocracy, what's femocracy, Dr. Ayuk?
Femocracy, in most cases, I'm not going to use the conceptual definition because it may not be understood, especially from people who are not from a gender background. But when we talk about femocracy, it's basically relates to women who are in position of decision making, you know, and there are two types of women that we can identify. Those who are women, but not necessarily standing for women. And we have those who are women and are gender aware and are passionate about actions that are geared towards promoting equality, women's rights, the visibility of women, etc., etc. So those who are women, but not necessarily interested in issues that concern women, are what we refer to as femocrats. Those are people refer to. That is the commonest explanation of a femocrat. Like if we take the case of Hillary Clinton, you know, Hillary Clinton was not supported by femocrats. Many American women did not vote for Hillary Clinton. You know, not because she was not a woman, but because not all women, you know, considered her as their candidate. So in gender studies, we always make a distinction because we always assume that when we have women in political decision making, they will be able to advocate for women's concern. It's really not a given.
All right. With that, we come to the end of our webinar. Vanessa, should I say it is over to you?
All right.
So you run it to a close, right, Vanessa?
Yes. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Primus. Thank you very much, Dr. Justine and Professor Lillian, for your brilliant presentation on the role of women in enhancing visibility in Africa. We are very happy. It was a very great presentation. And I guess the panelists learned a lot from the role of women, not only being present, but equally being visible in a political sphere and in decision making in the society. So we are very grateful for this presentation and for this webinar. We thank you for honoring the invitation of the Nkafo Policy Institute. We equally invite you to be as the next event, in our next events, because we organize events frequently. We equally wish to thank all the participants who sacrificed their time to be here with us present today. See you next time and stay blessed. We are going to send you emails whenever there is need to invite you for subsequent event on very, very interesting topics like this one and more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Prof, and thanks, Doc. I am so grateful. Very, very grateful.
Thank you too for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot.